Thank you for joining us for a look at the life of William Bligh. Before we begin, please remember to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment. Now lie back and join us on this journey through the life of William Bligh. The story of William Bligh begins on the south coast of England in the autumn of 1754. He was born in Plymouth, a port city where the smell of tar and the cries of gulls filled the air. The docks were alive with sailors and fishermen. Ships left for war, trade, and discovery. For a boy growing up there, the sea was not just a sight, it was a way of life. His father was Francis Bligh, a customs officer. His mother was Jane, a strong presence who watched over her son with pride. From his earliest days, William saw the sea as both a promise and a threat. It could offer fortune, but it could also take lives without mercy. He was a bright child with a sharp eye. He showed skill with drawing and maps. He also had a strong memory, which would later help him recall coastlines and harbours with detail that others often missed. At the age of 7, he was entered into the muster books of the Royal Navy. This was common practice for boys of families with ties to the service. By being listed so young, he began to earn seniority before even setting foot on a ship. It was a system that favoured connections, but it also threw children into a world of harsh discipline and danger. At 16, he was serving at sea. His training was strict. He learned to handle ropes, sails, and the complex web of orders that kept a ship moving. Life on board was hard. Food was often rotten. Fresh water was scarce. Men lived in cramped quarters where disease spread fast. Discipline was enforced with the lash, yet for a boy with ambition, the Navy was a school as well as a prison. William studied the art of navigation. He learned to read the stars and chart a course. His quick mind and steady hand set him apart from others. In 1771, Bligh's skills brought him under the command of one of the most famous captains of the age. James Cook was preparing for his second great voyage of discovery. He needed a young sailing master who could manage the ship's course and record vital details. Bligh was chosen. He was only 17. The role placed him at the heart of an expedition that would circle the globe. The voyage with Cook shaped Bligh's life. He watched how Cook ruled his men. Cook was stern but fair. He believed in discipline, but he also looked after the health of his crew. Cook was a master of navigation and mapping. He drew charts of new lands that were so accurate they would be used for centuries. Bligh observed and learned. He saw the Pacific Islands for the first time. He saw strange plants, animals, and people who lived far from Europe. The voyage was long and hard. There were storms, shortages, and danger from unknown coasts. But for Bligh, it was also a school in leadership and survival. Cook's death in Hawaii in 1779 shocked the young officer. Bligh had seen the captain as a model to follow. He had also seen how quickly command could turn from power to peril. Cook had been struck down by islanders after a quarrel. His men carried his remains back to the ship. The lesson for Bligh was clear. Authority at sea was never secure. A leader needed skill, courage, and also luck. After Cook, Bligh rose through the ranks. He married Elizabeth Betham, the daughter of a wealthy merchant. They would have 6 children together, though not all survived infancy. The marriage gave him stability at home, though his life was mostly at sea. He proved himself as a capable navigator and officer. In battle, he showed courage. During the war with France and America, he fought at sea with distinction. His skill with charts and maps earned him respect. He was noted for his precision and memory. Yet Bligh also gained a reputation for a sharp tongue. He was not known as a cruel man in the sense of flogging beyond the norm. In fact, his record shows he used the lash less often than many of his peers. What marked him was his temper and his words. He could insult and belittle men in front of others. He often called his officers names. He would mock them when they made mistakes. In the rigid world of the Navy, such words could sting more than a whip. They bred resentment among those who already lived under hardship. Still, his skill kept him in favour. By the 1780s, Britain looked to expand its empire and its trade. One plan was to bring breadfruit from the Pacific Islands to the West Indies. The idea was to feed enslaved workers on sugar plantations with the cheap fruit. It was a cold plan that tied science to slavery. The Admiralty sought a captain who could sail to Tahiti, gather the plants, and bring them back alive. Bligh was chosen. He was only 33. His ship would be HMS Bounty, a small vessel refitted for the task. But before the Bounty, Bligh had already endured years of hardship that had hardened his resolve. He knew the cost of failure. He had seen death by disease and storm. He had watched men desert in far-off lands. He believed strict order was the only way to keep a ship safe. For him, discipline was not cruelty, it was survival. The young captain prepared for his mission with care. He studied charts of the Pacific. He stocked the ship with supplies. He knew the journey would be long and the risks high. The Bounty was a small ship with just 46 men. They would be far from support. If discipline failed, they would be lost. Bligh's manner reflected this fear. He demanded respect. He demanded obedience. He demanded that his men trust his skill above all else. As the Bounty prepared to sail in 1787, Bligh's career stood at a high point. He was a seasoned officer, trained by Cook, proven in war, and trusted with a mission of imperial importance. Yet the seeds of future disaster were already sown. His reliance on sharp words would clash with men who had tasted freedom in Tahiti. His belief in discipline would collide with their desire for ease. His sense of duty would meet their longing for pleasure. The boy who had entered the Navy's muster book at 7 was now a captain in all but name. He was driven by a hunger to succeed and to be remembered as more than a minor officer. He had the skill, the training, and the courage. What he lacked was the gift of soft command, the kind of command that wins hearts as well as hands. His early life gave him no reason to think such softness was needed. The Navy of his youth was hard, brutal, and often cruel. Men were whipped for small crimes. They were pressed into service against their will. They were fed mouldy bread and salt meat full of maggots. Against this, Bligh's temper seemed mild by comparison. Yet history would show that in the close quarters of a small ship, words could cut deeper than blows. As the Bounty left Britain, the story of William Bligh entered its most famous stage. The voyage would test every lesson he had learned. It would push his skills to the limit. It would bring him face to face with betrayal. And it would cast him adrift, both at sea and in history. For now, though, he stood proud on the deck of his small ship. The wind filled the sails. The coast of England faded behind him. Ahead lay thousands of miles of ocean, a tropical island, and a destiny he could not yet see. William Bligh was a man shaped by the sea. From boy to officer, from cook's student to captain, he had walked a path of hardship and ambition. He carried with him the lessons of discipline, precision, and survival. He believed they would carry him through. But the sea is not only a teacher, it is also a test. And for William Bligh, the hardest test was yet to come. The Bounty left Spithead in December 1787. The weather was harsh and the seas rough. Men were packed into a ship that was small and crowded. The Bounty was not built for war. She was a converted collier, only 90 feet long, with a single deck. Her purpose was not battle but transport. Every inch had been altered to carry pots for young plants. Bligh believed the mission was a noble task. He would bring breadfruit from the Pacific and deliver it to the Caribbean. It would feed enslaved men and women who worked the sugar fields. The Admiralty saw it as profit. The Royal Society saw it as science. Bligh saw it as a chance for glory. The crew numbered 46. Among them was Fletcher Christian, the young master's mate who had sailed with Bligh before. There was John Fryer, the sailing master, a man of long service, but with little warmth for Bligh. There was William Peckover, the gunner who had once served under Captain Cook. There were men drawn from ports across England and Scotland. Some joined for pay, others to escape poverty. A few were pressed into service. All of them faced months at sea under the command of a captain who trusted skill above charm. The early weeks were hard. The Bounty was slow against winter storms. Ice clung to ropes. Sails froze in the wind. Water leaked into the decks. Bligh drove his men with strict order. He believed in health and routine. He demanded they eat sauerkraut and lime to ward off scurvy. He inspected the food daily. He scolded officers if he found waste. He allowed little slack. As the ship pushed south, tempers frayed. Bligh's tongue was sharp. He mocked men who failed. He called them names before the crew. His punishments were light compared to other ships. Yet his words bit deep. The sailing master, Friar, felt insulted. He believed Bligh belittled him in front of younger officers. Others muttered that the captain was mean with his praise. Still, the crew obeyed. They had little choice. Bligh planned to round Cape Horn. The southern tip of South America was a graveyard for ships. Winds screamed from the west. Waves rose like walls. Snow and hail battered sails. For weeks the Bounty tried to push through. Day after day, Bligh ordered new attempts. Day after day, storms forced them back. Men cursed the endless cold. Salt water soaked their clothes. Frost bit their hands and faces. They began to believe the ship would never make it through. At last Bligh gave in. He turned east across the Atlantic and steered for the Cape of Good Hope. The detour added months to the voyage. By the time they reached Africa, men were weary and bitter. They had fought storms, eaten stale food, and lived in fear of the Horn. Some began to question their captain. They whispered that he pushed them too hard. They spoke of his insults. They wondered if he cared more for his plants than for their lives. From Africa, the Bounty sailed across the Indian Ocean. The air grew warm. The seas calmed. Men dried their clothes, and their spirits lifted. They reached Tasmania in August 1788. From there they sailed north into the Pacific. After 10 months at sea, they sighted Tahiti. The island rose green from the blue water, ringed by white surf. Palms swayed in the breeze. Smoke rose from huts along the shore. Canoes darted out to greet the ship. For the wary crew, it seemed like paradise. The people of Tahiti welcomed them. Gifts were exchanged. Pigs, fruit, and fish were traded for iron and cloth. The islanders were curious about the visitors. They showed them the breadfruit trees, tall and broad with large leaves and round fruit. Bligh inspected the plants and planned how to collect them. He saw the mission moving towards success. But for the crew, Tahiti offered more than plants. It offered escape from the strict life of the ship. The island was rich with food. Women were friendly and open. Customs were unlike the rigid world of England. Men wandered ashore, feasted, and slept in huts with partners they took for weeks or months. They tattooed their bodies in the island style. They tasted freedom unlike anything they had known. Bligh allowed a long stay. He needed time to collect more than 1,000 young breadfruit plants and prepare them for the journey. Pots were filled with soil. Water tanks were built. The work was slow. Months passed. The crew grew rooted in the island life. They built ties with families. Some even married local women by custom. Bligh began to sense the danger. The longer they stayed, the harder it would be to leave. He pressed his men to work. He kept his strict routines. He demanded they return to the ship at night. He shouted when they failed. He scolded Christian, who had grown close to a Tahitian woman. He mocked him for neglecting duty. The young officer felt torn between love for the island and loyalty to his captain. Each harsh word cut deeper. By April 1789, the Bounty was ready to sail. The ship was crowded with breadfruit pots. The decks smelled of damp earth. The men prepared the sails, though many did so with heavy hearts. They had lived like kings on Tahiti. Now they faced months of hardship at sea. Bligh reminded them of duty. He spoke of honor, of service to king and country. Few listened with joy. They thought instead of the island women waving them off from the shore. The first weeks after leaving Tahiti were filled with tension. Men grumbled at the cramped decks. Water was rationed to keep the plants alive. Bligh inspected the breadfruit each day. He gave orders to care for them as if they were gold. Men noticed he spared more care for the plants than for their comfort. Some said he valued roots and leaves above flesh and blood. His temper grew short. He scolded Christian for slack work. He accused officers of laziness. He spoke of thieves when food went missing. He had long prided himself on using the lash less than other captains. But he used his tongue like a whip. His words struck harder than rope. Officers felt shamed in front of the crew. They began to hate the man they once admired. Christian in particular felt the sting. He had been close to Bligh, almost like a son, but now he endured public insults. Bligh called him ungrateful. He mocked his loyalty. He questioned his skill. Christian's heart was still on Tahiti, with the woman he had left behind. He brooded in silence. Resentment festered. The crew saw his unrest. They shared it. They whispered in corners. They remembered the warmth of the island, the ease of its life, the freedom they had tasted. Now they were crammed on a ship where every move was ordered, where every mistake was met with scorn. They began to look to Christian as a leader. He was young, fair, and friendly. He spoke kindly to them. He was the opposite of the captain. Bligh saw none of this. He believed his men respected him. He believed his skill was enough. He did not see how far the bonds of loyalty had stretched. He did not see how close they were to breaking. He thought only of his duty, his plants, and his mission. The voyage from Tahiti was meant to take them west across the Pacific, then around the Cape, and across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. It was a long road. At every stage, the men looked back to the island. Their hearts were not on the ship. They were still on the beach under the palms, with women who had smiled for them, with food that grew without labor, with a life without lashes and orders. Bligh drove them harder. He spoke of thieves, of slackness, of ingratitude. He praised no one. He trusted no one. He believed strict command would keep them safe. In truth, it was pushing them toward rebellion. The seeds of mutiny had been planted long before the day itself. They were sown in the storm at Cape Horn. They grew in the months of ease on Tahiti. They were watered by every harsh word Bligh spoke to his men. By the time the Bounty reached the waters near Tonga in April 1789, those seeds were ready to burst into open revolt. But in those final days before the storm broke, Bligh still saw himself as master of his ship. He had the plants he came for. He had a crew he believed he could control. He had the backing of the Navy and the Crown. He could not know that within days he would wake to find his ship gone, his command stolen, and his life cast adrift in a small open boat. The breadfruit voyage was meant to make Bligh's name. Instead, it brought him to the edge of ruin. The journey had taken him from icy storms to tropical shores, from hope to despair. It had placed him in the center of a struggle between duty and desire, order and freedom, captain and crew. It had set the stage for one of the most famous mutinies in history. The Bounty pressed on, sails full, pots of breadfruit swaying on the deck. The sea was calm, the sky was bright. Yet under the surface of that calm, discontent boiled. The men looked to Christian. Christian looked to the horizon. And Bligh, sharp of eye but blind to hearts, sailed into the storm that would define his name for all time. The Bounty left Tahiti in April 1789. The decks were full of pots with young breadfruit trees. The smell of damp soil hung in the air. Men stepped around the plants as if the ship was now half garden, half vessel. For Bligh the sight was proof of success. He had gathered what he came for. He had more than 1,000 plants ready for the long journey to the Caribbean. He believed his mission was secure. He believed his men would obey until the end. But the mood on the ship was dark. Months of freedom on Tahiti had changed the crew. They had lived with food that grew in the ground. They had slept in huts with women who welcomed them. They had felt no lash and no harsh tongue. They had been treated as men, not as tools, leaving that life behind cut deep. Each man who had taken a partner on the island now felt torn. Their bodies were on the Bounty, but their hearts were still on the beach. Bligh could not see this. He saw only slackness. He saw men slow at their duties. He saw faces that showed boredom and grief. He believed the cure was discipline. He spoke to them with sharp words. He mocked mistakes. He called men useless. He reminded them that he alone held command. His tongue lashed more than his whip ever did. He had always believed harsh words were less cruel than flogging. But on this voyage words cut deeper. Fletcher Christian was the man most changed. He had been close to Bligh at first. He had sailed with him before and trusted him. Bligh had treated him like a son. He had promoted him and praised his skill. But Tahiti had opened a wound. Christian had fallen for a woman there. He had wanted to stay. When the ship left, he felt as if his life had been torn away. He grew restless on deck. He walked the planks with eyes fixed on the sea. His mood darkened with every insult from his captain. Bligh noticed his change, but he did not soften. Instead, he struck harder. He mocked Christian in front of the men. He accused him of neglect. He spoke of him as weak. The crew heard every word. They saw their young officer stand silent while the captain scorned him. They began to feel pity for him. They began to turn toward him. The days after leaving Tahiti dragged. The The ship sailed west through calm seas. The heat grew heavy. Sweat ran down backs. Breadfruit pots needed constant water. Bligh ordered fresh water given to the plants before the men. He measured each drop. He cursed if he saw waste. The men saw the plants as rivals. They whispered that Bligh cared more for trees than for them. Each order to guard the breadfruit grew like a spark in dry grass. Small acts of defiance began to show. A rope left loose. A duty done slow. A tool misplaced. Bligh saw them and snapped. He called men idle dogs. He spoke of thieves and scoundrels. He accused officers of cowardice. His words filled the ship with shame and anger. Christian tried to hide his feelings, but his face gave him away. He grew pale. He bit his lip when Bligh scolded him. At times he clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. He was torn between duty and rage. He could not strike his captain, yet he could not endure much longer. Some men came to him in secret. They whispered of returning to Tahiti. They spoke of seizing the ship and sailing back. They said the island had everything they needed. They said life there was free of whips and harsh words. Christian listened but did not answer. He feared the gallows if they failed. He still felt bound by his oath. But each day the thought grew louder in his mind. Bligh remained blind. He believed strict command would hold them steady. He had seen desertions in other ports and believed firmness was the cure. He had no sense of how close his crew stood to revolt. He thought of breadfruit and maps of winds and currents. He thought of his orders from London. He did not think of the hearts of his men. The crew remembered his insults more than his skill. They remembered how he called them names. They remembered how he valued plants over water for their lips. They remembered his sharp tongue more than his steady hand. In the silence of night they lay awake and thought of Tahiti. The island pulled at them like a tide. Christian's struggle grew worse. He spoke little. He paced the deck at night. He thought of the woman he had left. He thought of Bligh's words. He thought of escape. At last he told a few close men that he could not go on. He said he would steal a boat and slip away at night. He would row back to Tahiti alone if need be. His friends warned him. They said Bligh would hunt him down. They said he would be lost at sea. Christian felt trapped. Word of his plan spread. Some urged him not to flee alone. They said the whole ship could be theirs. They said many would follow him if he rose against the captain. Christian shook his head. He still clung to loyalty. He still feared dishonor. Yet his heart was breaking. Bligh pressed harder. He accused officers of neglect. He accused Christian of plotting to steal coconuts. He spoke of him as a traitor. The insult struck deep. For Christian it was the final blow. He had been loyal. He had served well. Now his captain called him a thief before all men. His pride could bear no more. Night after night he thought of what to do. He imagined rowing away into the dark. He imagined taking the ship. He imagined the gallows. His mind swung between hope and dread. At last he began to speak with a few trusted men. They spoke of seizing the Bounty. They spoke of leaving Bligh adrift. They spoke of returning to Tahiti to live free. The men listened. Some feared death. Some hungered for freedom. Some longed for the women they had left behind. The thought of open revolt seemed mad, yet also sweet. They weighed the risk of ropes around their necks against the dream of palm trees and soft nights. Christian could not decide. One day he was set on escape. The next he drew back. The struggle tore him apart. His friends urged him to act. They said the crew would stand with him. They said Bligh's cruelty left no other path. Christian still wavered. Bligh saw none of it. He went on with his sharp tongue and strict orders. He believed all was under control. He believed his men feared him enough to obey. He believed his mission was safe. But the truth was plain on deck. Faces were sullen. Work was slow. Men muttered under their breath. They glanced at Christian with looks that said more than words. The ship moved west, but its spirit dragged back toward Tahiti. Each sunrise brought the Bounty closer to disaster. Each insult from Bligh pushed the crew nearer to the edge. Each sigh from Christian brought him nearer to choice. The seeds of rebellion were planted in every heart that longed for the island. They were watered by Bligh's words. They grew in silence until the day they would burst into open mutiny. The air on the ship grew heavy with tension. Men laughed less. Songs died away. The slap of waves and the creak of ropes filled the silence. Bligh stood on deck and gave orders as if nothing was wrong. Christian stood near him, pale and silent, his thoughts a storm. The crew waited, restless, ready for a spark. The Bounty sailed on through calm seas, but beneath the calm a storm brewed. Not in the sky, but in the hearts of the men. The moment of decision drew close. Soon words would turn to action. Soon loyalty would break. Soon the name of Bligh would be tied forever to mutiny. The night before the mutiny was calm. The sea was dark and still. Stars hung bright above the mast. The Bounty moved west under a soft breeze. Most of the crew lay in their hammocks. Some dreamed of Tahiti. Some dreamed of home. Fletcher Christian did not sleep. He walked the deck in silence. His mind was restless. He thought of the woman he had left on the island. He thought of Bligh's sharp words. He thought of escape. Hours before dawn he made his choice. He would act. He would seize the ship or die trying. His plan had no grand design. It was simple and desperate. He would rise with a few loyal men and take Bligh before the captain could resist. Once Bligh was bound, the rest of the crew would have no choice. Christian whispered to his friends. Edward Young agreed. Matthew Quintal agreed. Isaac Martin agreed. They armed themselves with cutlasses and muskets. They moved quiet through the dark. The deck was silent, but for the creak of timbers. In the dim light of lanterns their faces were pale and grim. There was no turning back. It was near 5 in the morning on the 28th of April 1789. The air was heavy with the scent of the sea. The sky to the east grew faint with the first light of dawn. Christian gathered his men at the captain's cabin. They burst inside. Bligh woke with a start. He shouted in anger. Before he could rise, Christian's men pinned him down. They tied his hands behind his back. Bligh cursed and shouted. He called them traitors. He ordered them to release him. His voice rang out in the stillness. The ship stirred to life. Men leapt from hammocks. Some ran to the deck to see what was happening. Some stayed frozen with fear. The sight of the captain bound shocked them. Bligh stood in his nightshirt, his hair loose, his face red with rage. He shouted that the king's service was betrayed. He called Christian a villain. Christian did not answer. His face was white. His eyes burned with fury and despair. The crew gathered. Some sided with Christian at once. They had long hated Bligh's tongue. They longed to return to Tahiti. They saw their chance and seized it. Others stood silent, torn between duty and desire. A few tried to defend Bligh, but were forced back by armed mutineers. The balance tipped quick. Christian had the deck. Bligh was bound. The ship was his. Christian ordered the loyal men gathered. 18 in all refused to join the mutiny. They were dragged to the launch, a small open boat. Bligh was shoved among them. He shouted still. He warned Christian of the gallows. He swore he would return. He swore that history would curse their names. The mutineers laughed. They stuffed bread and water into the boat. They tossed in a sextant and a few tools. Bligh pleaded for mercy. He asked that he be allowed charts and arms. Christian refused. He said only, "That is enough. You will live." His voice shook as he spoke. He was not calm. He was not cold. He was torn between rage and sorrow. He turned away so he would not have to see his captain's face. The boat was lowered into the sea. The waves lapped against its side. 18 men squeezed into the small craft. The Bounty towered above them, her sails full, her decks alive with the mutineers. Bligh stood in the stern. His eyes blazed with fury. He raised his fist and swore he would survive. He swore he would hunt them down. His voice echoed across the water. Christian stood on deck and watched. His face was pale. He gave no order to fire. He gave no order to kill. He let Bligh go. Perhaps he believed it an act of mercy. Perhaps he feared blood would curse them. He did not know that sparing Bligh would seal his fate. The Bounty sailed on, leaving the launch behind. The men in the small boat pulled at the oars. Their captain sat at the helm, silent now, his mind fixed on survival. The mutiny was done. The Bounty was lost. On the ship, the mutineers spoke in low voices. Some laughed with joy. Some trembled with fear. They had crossed a line that could never be undone. They were free of Bligh but bound now to treason. Christian walked the deck in silence. He looked out at the horizon. He muttered that he was damned. He said he was in hell. His friends tried to cheer him. They spoke of Tahiti. They spoke of life without orders. Christian did not smile. Bligh's men rowed into the open sea. The boat sat low in the water. Supplies were scarce. The sun rose hot. Their throats were dry, but Bligh held them steady. He told them to have faith. He told them he would guide them to safety. He took the sextant and began to chart their course. He would steer them across thousands of miles to Timor. It seemed madness, yet his resolve gave them hope. Back on the Bounty, the mutineers argued. Some wanted to sail straight back to Tahiti. Others feared the Royal Navy would find them there. They spoke of far islands. They spoke of hiding where no ship could reach. Christian listened but gave no firm answer. He seemed lost, as if he had not planned beyond the act itself. He had seized the ship, but not his destiny. The mutiny spread through whispers in every port. Ships carried the tale across oceans. The story grew in taverns and courts. Some said Bligh was a tyrant and the men had risen against cruelty. Others said he was a fine officer undone by weak hearts. The truth was blurred even then. All that was certain was that the Bounty was gone and a captain had been cast adrift. On the small boat, Bligh proved his skill. He rationed bread to the ounce. He shared water by the drop. He steered by stars. He kept order with iron will. When men despaired, he drove them on. When they thought of surrender to islanders, he forced them back to sea. Storms lashed them. Waves rose high as mountains. Still Bligh held the tiller. He brought them across more than 3,000 miles to safety. It was one of the greatest feats of seamanship in history. Christian never saw him again. The young officer who once called Bligh his friend had become his enemy. He had thrown away his career, his honour, and his peace of mind. He sailed the Bounty with men who could not agree on where to go. Some chose Tahiti, some drifted to Tubuai. In time, Christian and a handful settled on Pitcairn, a lonely island hidden in the Pacific. There their tale ended in blood and fire. But on that morning of April 28, the choice was still fresh. The sun rose on a ship without her captain. The crew looked to Christian with hope and fear. He gave them little comfort. He walked the deck pale and grim. He had gained the ship but lost his soul. He had freed himself from Bligh's lash but bound himself to a fate worse than death. The mutiny on the Bounty was over in minutes. It was not a battle but a swift act of betrayal. No shots were fired. No blood was spilled. Yet it became one of the most famous revolts in history. It was a tale of discipline and desire, of harsh words and soft temptations, of a captain who thought skill was enough and a young officer who let his heart rule his hand. For Bligh, the mutiny was a wound that never healed. For Christian, it was a fire that consumed him. For the men, it was both freedom and damnation. For the world, it was a story told and retold, shaped by myth and film, a drama of sea and storm that never faded. On that calm morning in the Pacific, the seeds of rebellion bloomed. The breadfruit swayed in their pots. The sails filled with wind. The Bounty sailed on without her master. The captain drifted away into legend. The mutineers steered toward doom. The world had gained a story that would never die. The small launch rocked in the water as the Bounty pulled away. The ship loomed above them with sails spread wide. The men in the boat looked up at her with grief and anger. She was their home, their safety, their whole world at sea. Now she was gone. They were left in a craft barely 20 feet long, with little food, little water, and no shelter from the sun or storm. Bligh sat at the stern, bound at first but soon freed by his men. His eyes burned with fury. He swore that he would bring them to safety. He swore he would find the mutineers and see justice done. His voice was calm but fierce. His men listened. They needed that strength. They needed to believe. There were 18 men with him, loyal sailors and officers who had refused to join Christian. Some trembled with fear. Some cursed their fate. All knew that death was near. The Pacific was vast. No rescue would come. They had no maps. They had only a sextant, a compass, and the skill of their captain. Bligh began at once to make order. He took stock of their food. 150 pounds of bread, a few pounds of pork, some rum, a few coconuts, 6 quarts of water. That was all. He measured each portion. He gave every man 1 ounce of bread and a sip of water a day. He warned that none must steal. If they broke the rules, all would die. The men rowed when the wind failed. They rowed under the hot sun until their arms ached. Salt water stung their skin. Blisters rose on their hands. The boat sat low in the water. Waves broke over the bow. Clothes were soaked and never dry. Nights were cold. Days burned with heat. Yet Bligh kept them steady. He spoke firm words. He reminded them of their duty. He told them to trust him. They tried first to land on Tofua, an island close by. They hoped to find food and water. They rowed ashore and were met by islanders. At first the people gave them coconuts, but soon the mood turned dark. Stones were thrown. Spears were raised. In the rush to escape, one loyal man, John Norton, was struck down and killed. His body was left behind as the boat fled to sea. It was the first death, and it cut deep. Bligh knew then they could not trust strange shores. He decided they must sail for Timor, more than 3,000 miles away. It was madness. The boat was open. The seas were vast. Yet he had no other choice. He set his course by the stars. He marked their path in a small notebook. His hand was steady even as his men groaned in pain. Storms struck them as they crossed the open ocean. Rain poured down in sheets. Waves towered above them. The boat rose and fell like a cork. Men bailed water with their hands. They prayed the boat would not break. Bligh held the tiller through each storm. He shouted orders above the roar of the wind. His voice cut through fear. His skill kept them alive. When the sea calmed, they searched for food. They caught small birds that landed on the boat. They ate them raw, bones and all. They found clams on reefs. They chewed seaweed. They drank rainwater when clouds allowed. Their bellies ached with hunger. Their lips cracked with thirst. Yet Bligh still gave each man his fair share. None starved while another ate. His strict order saved them. Bligh wrote in his journal each day. He noted their course, their speed, their rations. He wrote of his men's suffering. He wrote of his own resolve. He swore that he would bring them through. The act of writing gave him strength. It also gave him proof. He wanted the world to know what they endured. He wanted no one to doubt his story if they lived to tell it. The weeks dragged on. Men grew weak. Their skin burned dark by the sun. Their bodies thin, their eyes hollow. Some muttered in despair. Some begged to land on islands they passed. Bligh refused. He feared more attacks like the one on Tofua. He told them the sea was safer than land. They cursed him but obeyed. They had no choice. They sighted the coast of Australia after weeks at sea. They saw reefs and islands. They landed to find oysters, fish, and water. For a brief time they feasted and felt alive. But Bligh would not stay. He pushed them onward. He knew they must reach Timor, or they would die hunted men. At night Bligh looked at the stars. He measured their height with the sextant. He marked their position with care. He guided the boat as if it were a ship of the line. His mind was sharp, though his body suffered. He spoke little of pain. He carried the weight of all. His men later said his will was iron. After 47 days at sea, they reached Timor. They had sailed more than 3,600 miles in an open boat. It was a feat beyond belief. When they staggered ashore, they looked like ghosts. Their clothes hung in rags. Their bodies were wasted. But they had lived. 17 men had survived with their captain. Only Norton was lost. The Dutch received them with shock. They gave them food and shelter. They praised Bligh's skill. Word spread of his journey. Sailors could hardly believe it. A small boat with so many men, crossing half the Pacific. It was called a miracle. It was called the greatest open boat voyage ever made. Bligh's men spoke with awe of their captain. They had hated his tongue on the Bounty. They had feared his temper. But in the boat they saw his strength. They saw his calm in storm, his order in despair, his skill in the face of death. They said he saved their lives. They said no other could have done it. For Bligh the voyage was both triumph and wound. He had proved his mastery. He had brought his men safe. Yet he had lost his ship. He had been betrayed by his friend. He had been cast out like a dog. The glory of his seamanship could not erase the shame of the mutiny. Both would follow him for life. From Timor, Bligh found passage to Europe. Months later he reached England. He was hailed by some as a hero. He was praised for his skill and courage. But questions remained. How had the mutiny begun? Why had his men turned on him? Was he cruel, or were they weak? Bligh defended himself with his journal. He said he had been no worse than other captains. He said Christian was missiled by ease and women. The Admiralty believed him. He was cleared of blame at court-martial. His career went on. But the memory of the boat never left him. He had seen men starve and weep. He had felt the lash of storm and sun. He had stared death in the face for 7 weeks. He had held his crew alive by force of will. It was a triumph few could match. It was also a scar that marked him. The story of the launch spread through the world. Sailors told it in taverns. Writers set it down in books. It became legend. Some praised Bligh as a master of the sea. Others saw only the harsh captain whose men had cast him off. The truth lay between. He was both tyrant and saviour, cursed and blessed, hated and admired. On the calm seas of the Pacific the Bounty sailed away. On the rough seas of survival Bligh carved his name into history. Cast adrift, he proved what a sailor could endure. Cast adrift, he proved that the sea could be crossed with nothing but skill and will. Cast adrift, he became more than a man. He became a story told for centuries. The mutiny had broken him, but it had also made him. He lost his ship, yet he gained a place in legend. He was mocked, yet he was praised. He was hated, yet he was followed. He was William Bligh, captain without a ship, sailor without mercy, survivor without equal. And even as he stood alive in Timor, even as his men blessed his name, the shadow of the Bounty still haunted him. For Fletcher Christian was free. The ship was lost. The mutineers sailed on to their own fate. And Bligh knew his story was not yet done. The voyage to Timor had saved their lives, but it had broken their bodies. The men staggered ashore like shadows. Their skin was dark with sun and salt. Their clothes hung loose. Their eyes were hollow. Yet they were alive. Dutch officials looked at them with wonder. They could not believe men had crossed so far in such a small boat. Bligh wrote their names down in his journal. He would not let the world forget who had endured and who had died. The Dutch gave them food and rest. Slowly the men gained strength. They ate bread, meat, and fruit until their bellies ached. They slept in clean beds. They washed salt from their skin. It was like waking from a long nightmare, but not all recovered. Illness struck in the weeks that followed. Fever and weakness took some of the men who had survived storms and hunger. They had lived through the sea, but not through the sickness that came after. Each death was another blow to Bligh. He cursed fate, yet pressed on. From Timor Bligh sought passage west. His goal was clear. He must return to England. He must tell the Admiralty what had happened. He must clear his name. He must see the mutineers brought to justice. Every mile was another step toward reckoning. He carried with him his journal, his maps, and the memory of betrayal. The journey home was long. They passed through Batavia, where fever struck again. Men grew weak. Some died. Bligh nursed them as best he could. He pushed himself beyond his own strength. He would not allow despair. He told them they must live to tell their tale. But fate was cruel. Of the 18 men who had entered the boat with him, only 12 would stand again on English soil. The rest were buried far from home. When Bligh at last reached Portsmouth in March 1790, news of the mutiny had already spread. Rumours filled taverns and papers. Some said he was a tyrant who had driven his men to revolt. Others said the crew were weak and tempted by island ease. No one knew the truth. All waited for Bligh's return to hear his side. When he stepped ashore, crowds gathered to see him. He was gaunt yet proud. He carried himself with the bearing of a captain. His survival was hailed as a feat of seamanship unmatched in the age. Bligh went at once to the Admiralty. He gave his account in full detail. He handed over his journal. He described the voyage of the launch, the storms, the hunger, the death of John Norton, the arrival at Timor. He showed his maps. He explained how Christian had risen with a few men at dawn and seized the ship. He denied cruelty. He said he had used harsh words but little lash. He said he had cared for his men's health. He said Christian had been led astray by ease and women in Tahiti. His words were clear, his case strong. A court-martial was called, as was the custom when a captain lost his ship. Bligh stood before his peers at Portsmouth dockyard in October 1790. The room was tense. Officers in wigs and uniforms listened as he told his story. Witnesses spoke of the voyage in the launch. They praised his skill. They said he had saved their lives. None accused him of cruelty beyond measure. The court found him not guilty. He was cleared of blame. His honor was restored. The Admiralty rewarded him with promotion. He was praised for his seamanship. He was given command of another ship. Yet his name was tied now to the mutiny. No matter his skill, no matter his survival, he would forever be linked to that act of rebellion. The word bounty hung over him like a shadow. The Navy sent ships to hunt the mutineers. HMS Pandora was dispatched in 1790 to the Pacific. After long months, she found 14 of the men on Tahiti. Some had stayed there openly. Some had tried to build lives with island wives. They were seized, chained, and placed in a cell on the deck called Pandora's Box. The ship searched for the rest but found nothing. Pitcairn was hidden, far off charts. The search failed. On the voyage home, Pandora struck a reef and sank. 4 prisoners drowned. 10 survived to face trial in England. The court in 1792 heard their pleas. Some were condemned and hanged. Others were pardoned or acquitted. The tale shocked the nation. The image of Christian leading men against their captain stirred both fear and fascination. Some saw him as a hero who had broken free of tyranny. Others saw him as a traitor who had doomed his comrades. His fate remained a mystery, for he was never seen again. Bligh rose in rank, but his temper still haunted him. He commanded in battle and showed courage. He fought at Camperdown and Copenhagen. He earned praise from admirals. Yet his sharp tongue still caused quarrels. Officers grumbled at his insults. Some never forgave him. His skill was beyond doubt, but his manner left scars. The mutiny also entered legend. Writers and poets took up the tale. They painted Christian as a tragic figure, noble yet doomed. They painted Bligh as cruel, harsh and bitter. The truth was lost in the fog of story. Bligh raged at these tales. He swore he was not the monster they made. But public opinion is a tide that no man can turn. The bounty became a myth, and in myth Bligh was cast as villain. Still, he pressed on. He led another breadfruit voyage in 1791. This time he succeeded. He gathered plants from Tahiti and carried them to the West Indies. They took root and grew. The mission that had sparked mutiny was at last fulfilled. Yet few cared for the fruit. Planters did not prize it. Slaves did not welcome it. The voyage was a hollow triumph. For Bligh the true reckoning was not in plants but in memory. He had survived the sea. He had cleared his name. He had seen mutineers hanged. Yet he could not escape the story. Wherever he went, men whispered of the bounty. They told of Christian's rise, of Bligh's fall, of the longboat voyage. They told it as they pleased, twisting fact to suit fancy. Bligh grew bitter. He wrote his own accounts to defend himself. He filled them with detail, with maps and lists. He hoped to set the record straight, but the more he wrote, the less men believed. He could never escape Christian. The young officer who had once been like a son to him was now his ghost. He dreamed of the dawn when the mutiny came. He saw the pale face, the shaking hand, the cutlass raised. He heard again the words that had damned him. "I am in hell," Christian had said. Bligh carried that voice all his days. Yet for all his rage, Bligh was no broken man. He rose to the rank of post-captain. He earned respect in war. He was trusted with fleets. He was later sent to govern New South Wales. His career endured where others failed. His skill was his shield. His will was his sword. Return and reckoning were not the same. Bligh had returned with honour. He had reckoned with his judges and been cleared. But he could not reckon with history. He could not change how the world saw him. He could not erase the mutiny from his name. It clung to him as salt clings to wood. He was both hero and villain. He was both saviour and tyrant. He was the man who crossed an ocean in an open boat. He was the man whose crew rose against him. He was William Bligh, cast in two lights, never whole. The reckoning would follow him across years and seas. It would follow him to the battlefields of Europe. It would follow him to the shores of Australia. It would follow him to his grave. And long after he was gone, the tale of the bounty would still be told, with Bligh at its heart, cursed and praised, damned and saved. Bligh returned to England with his honour saved, but his name marked forever. He had faced the court. He had been cleared of blame. He had been praised for his seamanship. Yet no one could speak his name without also speaking the word mutiny. Wherever he walked, men whispered. Some praised him as a master of the sea. Others cursed him as a tyrant. The truth sat heavy between the two. But the navy needed men of skill. Britain was at war with France and Spain. The seas were fields of battle. Ships fought for empire. Trade flowed or failed on the strength of captains. Bligh was trusted again with command. His voyages were long, his orders strict. He knew the value of discipline and the price of failure. In 1791, he sailed once more for the Pacific. This time he commanded HMS Providence and HMS Assistant. His task was the same as before: gather breadfruit in Tahiti and deliver it to the West Indies. Where the Bounty had failed, the Providence would succeed. The voyage was tense but steady. Bligh knew his men watched him. He measured his words, yet held to strict order. He gathered more than 2,000 plants. He crossed oceans. He delivered them safe. The breadfruit was planted in the soil of Jamaica. His mission was fulfilled. Yet the fruit brought little joy. Planters did not prize it. Slaves did not welcome it. It grew, but it did not change the world as the Admiralty hoped. Bligh had risked his life and reputation for a crop that meant little. He called it success, but he knew it was hollow. The shadow of the Bounty still loomed larger. Bligh turned again to war. In 1797 he fought at Camperdown under Admiral Duncan. The Dutch fleet was broken. Bligh commanded his ship with skill and courage. He was praised for his conduct. In 1801 he fought at Copenhagen under Admiral Parker and Lord Nelson. The battle was fierce among shoals and guns. Bligh directed fire with calm resolve. He was thanked by Nelson himself. His record in war was firm. His skill in battle could not be denied. But his tongue was still sharp. He clashed with officers. He mocked mistakes. He scolded in front of men. His words bred resentment, as they always had. The Navy knew his worth, but also knew his faults. He was both asset and burden. He was brilliant and abrasive. At home, Bligh lived with his wife Elizabeth and their daughters. He wrote letters filled with detail of his voyages. He defended himself against tales of cruelty. He collected charts and maps. He sought to prove his skill to the world. Yet his family also felt his temper. He was quick to anger. He demanded respect. He was not cruel, but he was hard. His children feared his rages, though they loved his pride. In 1805, Bligh was made captain of HMS Warrior. He was praised again for discipline and order. His name had been cleared in the eyes of the Admiralty. Yet the public still loved the story of the Bounty. Writers made plays and poems. They painted Christian as a hero, noble and brave. They painted Bligh as bitter, harsh, and cold. He read these works with fury. He called them lies. He said history would judge him true. But history cared little for truth. It cared for story. And the story had cast him as villain. In 1806 he was given a new post. He was named Governor of New South Wales, a young colony in Australia. His task was to bring order, to reform trade, to curb corruption. The post was honour, but also danger. The colony was harsh, ruled by soldiers and settlers. Rum was the main currency. Officers of the New South Wales Corps controlled it and grew rich. The governor who touched their profit would meet their wrath. Bligh sailed with his family to Sydney. He arrived with high hopes. He saw a colony rough and wild. Streets were filled with convicts, soldiers, and traders. Rum was drunk in every tavern. Rum was traded for food, land, and even clothes. Bligh swore he would end the trade. He banned rum as currency. He tried to enforce fair law. He broke the power of officers who grew rich from drink. But his manner was the same as at sea. He scolded, he mocked, he shouted at men of rank. He called them scoundrels and liars. He made enemies fast. The officers of the corps hated him. Traders cursed him. Even some settlers who wished for reform grew wary of his temper. He was not cruel, but he was harsh. His words turned allies to foes. Bligh pressed on. He seized illegal stills. He closed corrupt shops. He stood firm against the corps. He believed duty was above friendship. He believed honour was above peace. He had fought storms and mutiny. He was not afraid of soldiers on land, but he misjudged the depth of their anger. In 1808 the corps rose against him. Led by Major George Johnston, they marched with muskets through the streets of Sydney. They stormed Government House. Bligh tried to resist. He tried to rally support, but he had few friends left. The soldiers broke in. They found him hiding behind a bed. He was seized and held prisoner. The corps declared Johnston governor. It was the only military coup in Australian history. Bligh was kept under guard for more than a year. He wrote letters of protest. He called the officers rebels. He swore he still held the Crown's authority, but his words held no power. He was a prisoner again, as he had been on the Bounty. This time it was not sailors who bound him but soldiers. In 1809 a new governor, Lachlan Macquarie, was sent from London with troops. He restored order. Johnston was court-martialed and dismissed. Bligh was freed and returned to England. His honour was saved again, but once more his name was tied to rebellion, first at sea, then on land. Twice cast down by men who would not accept his rule. Twice restored by the Crown. Bligh's later years were calmer. He was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1810, then to Vice Admiral in 1814. He took no more great commands. He spent time with his family. He drew maps. He designed plans for harbours and canals. He worked on Dublin Bay and other projects. Some of his ideas were praised, some were never built. His mind was still sharp, his hands still steady. But the world remembered the Bounty. Writers told and retold the tale. Painters showed Christian seizing the ship, Bligh bound and raving. No canvas showed Bligh at the tiller of the launch, guiding his men across oceans. No poem sang of his iron will in storms. The myth had chosen its heroes and villains. Bligh was trapped in its grip. He grew old with bitterness. He knew his seamanship was beyond compare. He knew he had saved lives. He knew he had served king and country with skill. Yet he was mocked in papers and plays. He fought to clear his name, but the tide was against him. He died in 1817, aged 63, in his London home. He was buried at St Mary at Lambeth. His grave carried words of praise for his skill and courage. But the reckoning of history was harsher. To many he was still the tyrant of the Bounty. To some he was the hero who crossed an ocean in an open boat. To most he was both. His life beyond the Mutiny was full of battles, voyages, reforms, and honours. Yet the Mutiny always stood at the centre. Bligh lived beyond the Bounty. He fought and won great battles. He governed and reformed. He mapped and planned. He rose to Vice Admiral. He endured shame and found honour. But history would not let him go. His name was bound to that dawn in 1789. Bound to the moment Christian seized him. Bound to the sight of a small boat drifting on a vast sea. Beyond the Bounty he was many things. Husband, father, officer, governor, reformer, admiral. But in the eyes of the world he was always the captain who lost his ship to mutiny. The man whose words cut too sharp. The man whose skill was unmatched. The man cursed and praised in equal measure. When Bligh sailed for New South Wales in 1806, he believed he carried with him a chance for redemption. The Admiralty had given him the role of governor. It was no small task. The colony was young, raw, and unruly. Convicts worked the fields and built the roads. Soldiers of the New South Wales Corps kept order, but also bent it to their own gain. Rum was the currency of the land. Trade, wages, and bribes were all measured in drink. Power lay in the hands of men who grew rich from it. The king wished for reform. Bligh was sent to deliver it. The voyage out was long. Bligh travelled with his daughter Mary and her husband John Putland. Elizabeth, his wife, stayed behind in England. The journey across the world gave him time to think. He wrote notes on plans for the colony. He intended to curb the rum trade. He intended to strengthen farms and trade. He intended to show firm justice. He had survived storms and mutiny. He believed no challenge on land could match the sea. He reached Sydney in August. The settlement was small but growing. Wooden houses and rough streets spread around the harbour. Convicts toiled in fields. Soldiers lounged in barracks. Traders dealt rum openly. Bligh saw at once the depth of corruption. He spoke with officers of the corps. He met John MacArthur, a former officer turned wealthy settler, who had built power from wool and trade. Bligh distrusted him from the start. Their eyes met with suspicion. From his first weeks Bligh moved against rum. He banned its use as payment. He tried to stop its flow into the colony. He ordered fairer treatment for poor settlers. He sought to give land to honest men rather than corrupt officers. He worked to cut the grip of MacArthur and the corps. His intent was clear. He would break the power of the few for the good of the many. But his manner was the same as at sea. He shouted. He scolded. He mocked those who opposed him. He called them scoundrels and cheats. He showed no care for their pride. His words turned dislike into hate. The corps felt insulted. MacArthur plotted revenge. Even settlers who welcomed reform grew wary of his temper. He lacked the grace to win hearts. He relied only on his authority. Still, he pressed on. He cut licenses for traders who broke rules. He seized illegal stills. He punished officers who defied him. He showed favor to farmers who obeyed his orders. He demanded obedience and order. Yet his foes grew stronger in the shadows. They whispered that he ruled with rage. They said he was no better than a tyrant. They spoke of the mutiny on the Bounty and painted him as the same cruel man. Old rumors found new ears. John MacArthur became the center of the storm. He clashed with Bligh over trade and land. He defied the governor's orders. He refused to yield his profits from rum. Bligh pressed charges against him. He ordered him arrested. MacArthur refused and called on the corps for support. The officers, already filled with anger, sided with him. Bligh had set himself against the richest settler and the strongest soldiers. It was a fight he could not win alone. On the 26th of January 1808 the corps marched. Soldiers in uniform filled the streets of Sydney. Drums beat. Muskets glinted in the sun. They moved toward Government House. Civilians watched in shock and fear. No shots were fired. No blood was spilled, but the sight was grim. The king's own soldiers were rising against his governor. Inside the house, Bligh tried to rally support. He called on settlers loyal to him. Few came. He ordered soldiers to defend him. They did not obey. He was left with his daughter and a handful of aides. He moved from room to room as the corpse broke in. He is said to have hidden behind a bed. Though some claim he stood firm. The image of him hiding became legend. His foes spread it far and wide. It marked him with shame, though he swore it was false. The corps arrested him. They placed him under guard. Johnston, the major who led them, declared himself governor. MacArthur walked free. Rum once more flowed in the streets. The coup was complete. The only military rebellion in Australian history had taken place. And William Bligh was again a prisoner of his own men. For more than a year he was held. He wrote letters of protest. He called the corps traitors. He swore he still held the king's authority. But his words carried no power. He was confined while his enemies ruled. His daughter stayed with him, a loyal shadow in his disgrace. The colony returned to its old ways. Rum ruled again. In England the news caused shock. A governor had been deposed by his own soldiers. The Admiralty could not allow such defiance. In 1809 they sent a new governor, Lachlan Macquarie, with fresh troops. He took control, ended the rule of the corps, and restored order. Johnston was court-martialed and dismissed from the army. MacArthur was forced back to England to answer charges. Bligh was freed at last. He had been held for more than a year. He sailed home with his honour in doubt, but not destroyed. The Crown declared him restored. His rank and pay were safe. Yet his name was scarred again. Once more he had faced rebellion. Once more his command had been broken by those who despised him. He returned to England in 1810. He was promoted to Rear Admiral, then to Vice Admiral. He did not take major commands again. His days of storm and mutiny were past. He spent his years with family, working on charts and plans for harbours. He lived quietly, but never at peace. The Rum Rebellion became legend as the Bounty had before. Some called it proof of Bligh's cruelty. Some said it showed his courage against corruption. The truth, as always, lay between. He had been right to fight the trade in rum. He had been right to resist the corps. But his manner had doomed him. His tongue was as sharp in Sydney as on the Bounty. His words made enemies where he needed friends. His temper turned respect to hate. Bligh's legacy in Australia is complex. He is remembered as the only governor deposed by force. Some see him as a reformer who stood against greed. Others see him as a tyrant who failed to rule with wisdom. His name is tied to both honour and shame. The rebellion was his last great storm. He had faced mutiny at sea and revolt on land. Twice his authority had been broken. Twice he had endured disgrace. Yet twice he had been restored by the Crown. Few men could claim such trials. fewer still could claim survival. In the end, the Rum Rebellion showed the same truth as the Bounty. Bligh was a man of iron skill and fragile temper. He could guide men across oceans. He could survive storms no other could. But he could not win their hearts. He could not soften his words. He could not bend. And so they broke him. When he died in 1817, the tale of the rebellion was still told. It joined the mutiny in shaping his memory. He was both hero and villain, saviour and tyrant. In England, he was honoured as a vice-admiral. In Australia, his name was cursed and praised alike. His life was proof that a man can be both right and doomed, both strong and undone by his own hand. William Bligh lived his last years in London. He had survived storms, mutiny, and rebellion. He had crossed seas in a boat with little food and no shelter. He had fought in great battles and served under Nelson. He had ruled a far colony and stood against corruption. He had risen to the rank of vice-admiral. Yet his name was still bound to shame. He was remembered more for loss than for victory, more for quarrels than for skill, more for the mutiny on the Bounty than for the miles he had sailed. He spent his days with his family. His wife Elizabeth was his anchor. His daughters were grown. He wrote letters and notes. He drew maps. He planned harbours and canals. His mind stayed sharp even as his body grew weak. He was restless in peace. The sea had shaped him, and he longed for the order of command. But no new post came. The crown had honoured him with promotion, but kept him from power. He was left with memory and paper. He thought often of the Bounty. The mutiny had cut him deeper than any storm. He could not escape it. Even in quiet moments he saw again the pale face of Christian. He heard again the words spoken in despair. He felt again the ropes on his wrists, and the heave of the boat as it hit the water. He remembered each mile of the voyage to Timor. He remembered the cries of men starving and the death of Norton on Tofua. He remembered every insult spread in the years after. He read the books and pamphlets that told the story. Most painted him as cruel. They called him harsh, bitter, and petty. They praised Christian as noble and brave. They spoke of Tahiti as paradise, and of Bligh as the man who had torn men from joy. He raged at these lies. He wrote his own accounts. He filled them with facts, charts, and witness. He wanted the world to know he was not the tyrant they claimed. But the world loved the tale more than the truth. The tale was easier. It had a hero and a villain. And Bligh was cast as the villain. The Rum Rebellion only fed the image. His foes in Sydney had spread the story of him hiding under a bed. They said he was weak, a coward, unfit to rule. He denied it with fury. He said he had faced his captors with courage. He said the tale was slander. Yet once a story spreads, it cannot be killed. The picture of Bligh cowering stayed fixed in the minds of many. It joined the Bounty to mark him as cruel and weak all at once. In truth, he was neither. He was not soft, but he was not a monster. He was not coward, but he was not gentle. He was a man of skill and temper. He was a sailor whose seamanship saved lives, and whose words cost him loyalty. He could guide men through storms, but he could not guide their hearts. He could fight enemies on the sea, but not within his own ranks. He could win battles yet lose trust. The Admiralty never doubted his skill. He rose in rank. He earned respect from admirals who saw his worth. Nelson himself had praised him at Copenhagen. Yet the public never forgave him. Plays, poems, and later novels turned Christian into a tragic hero. They turned Bligh into a villain whose anger drove good men to rise. He lived long enough to see his own story twisted. He died knowing history had judged him unfair. In December 1817, he passed away in his London home. He was 63. He was buried at St Mary at Lambeth. His grave bore words of praise. It named his battles and his service. It spoke of his skill and his honour. It did not speak of the Bounty. Yet all who read his name thought first of mutiny. The legacy of William Bligh is torn in two. On one side he is remembered as a master of the sea. His voyage in the launch is still hailed as one of the greatest feats of navigation and survival in history. His charts and notes remain proof of his sharp eye and steady hand. His role in battles showed courage. His stand against rum showed resolve. He was a man of iron will. On the other side he is remembered as a tyrant. His harsh words, his sharp temper, his failure to win the loyalty of his men all mark him as the cause of rebellion. His enemies wrote the stories. Writers gave them life. Films later fixed them in the minds of millions. In those tales, Christian is noble and Bligh is cruel. That image has never faded. The truth lies between. He was not cruel beyond the norm of his time. He flogged less than many captains. He cared for the health of his men. He demanded they eat lime to ward off scurvy. He rationed food with fairness. Yet he mocked and belittled. He humiliated officers in front of crews. He lacked grace and patience. He struck with words instead of whips. And for many men, words cut deeper. History is rarely fair. It remembers stories more than facts. The story of the Bounty was too strong to die. It held every theme men love. Rebellion against harsh rule. A young officer torn between duty and love. A captain who lost his ship but not his will. An island paradise set against the grey world of duty. It became legend, and in legend Bligh was cursed. Yet some voices still praise him. Sailors who know the sea call his voyage to Timor unmatched. Historians who study records see his skill. They see a man more complex than villain or hero. They see a man whose strength saved lives and whose weakness cost him command. They see William Bligh as human, flawed, and remarkable. The mutineers who followed Christian found no peace. Some were hanged in England. Some died on Pitcairn in blood and fire. Their fate was grim. Yet the tales still cast them as noble. Christian in particular became a ghost hero. His body was never found. Some said he lived on. Some said he died quick. Myth made him eternal. In his shadow Bligh looked harsher still. But Christian did not sail 3,000 miles in an open boat. Christian did not keep starving men alive on drops of water and scraps of bread. Christian did not stand in battle under fire at Camperdown and Copenhagen. Christian did not fight corruption in Sydney. Christian lived only in legend. Bligh lived in fact. The legacy of Bligh is a warning. It shows the cost of temper. It shows how words can break bonds faster than whips. It shows how skill is not enough if respect is lost. It shows how history can twist a man into a shape that fits its tale. It shows how truth can drown beneath story. Yet it also shows endurance. It shows will. It shows how one man can cross an ocean with nothing but faith in himself. It shows how duty can hold firm when all else falls apart. It shows how a flawed man can still achieve what others could not. William Bligh's grave lies quiet in London. Visitors read the name and think of mutiny. Few know of the battles he fought. Few know of the maps he drew. Few know of his work in harbours and canals. Few know of his service beyond the Bounty. But those who study him see more than a tyrant. They see a man who lived a hard life with iron skill. They see a man who faced storms of sea and storms of men and endured both. He was not loved. He was not gentle. He was not easy. But he was strong. He was skilled. He was unbroken until death. His legacy is that of a difficult man. A man both cursed and praised. A man hated by some and admired by others. A man who lost his ship and gained a place in legend. And so his story lives on. The mutiny on the Bounty is still told in books, plays, and films. Children learn his name. Scholars argue his guilt. Sailors study his charts. His life remains a mix of fact and myth. He cannot escape it. Even in death he sails forever in that small launch on the vast Pacific, eyes fixed on the horizon, hands steady on the tiller, voice harsh yet strong, leading men to life against all odds.